Good afternoon to everyone else, all our panelists and participants here today. Although if I look at the clock, we got a little bit further here in BC before we all hit afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here this afternoon and moderating this timely, topical, and important panel today. As many of you would know, I would be apt to laser focus this through a labor force lens, considering the vacancies and the struggles that our members and businesses are having from coast to coast to coast, sector to sector to sector. But as you all know as well, inclusive recovery is so much more than that. Diversity and inclusion is in the workplace fosters creative thinking, innovation, problem solving, and providing organizations, businesses, communities, and the entire country with a competitive advantage. We've convened this panel today to discuss opportunities for underrepresented segments of the Canadian population to participate in economic activity through entrepreneurialism, partnerships, and labor force participation. I'm really looking forward to these insights today and insights we will have thanks to our distinguished panel. I'm going to introduce the panelists here. Our first panelist today is Chris Fowler, who is the president and CEO of CWB Financial Group. We also have Arlene Strom, the chief legal officer and general counsel for Suncor. Bassy, who is the director of HR transformation at Air Canada, as well as Shawna Archibald, who's the executive director, client services at JP Morgan Chase. I'm going to open here with a few moderated questions, folks, and then we're going to open the floor to you. So I've got Slido over there and looking forward to the questions coming through. For my first round and first set of questions, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, take a couple minutes, talk about your company, your business, your organization, who you represent, and how and why inclusive growth provides a competitive advantage. Chris, I'll ask you to take the floor first. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leah, and great to be here. It's a great opportunity. So, as you said, I'm Chris Fowler. I'm the president CEO of CWB Financial Group. So, Canadian Western Bank is sort of the core of that group. I've been with the bank since 1991 and became the CEO in 2013. So, we're a growth company. You know, when I started in 1991, we had about 400 million in loans, and we've just passed 32 billion in loans in the third quarter of this fiscal year. We focus on small to medium-sized businesses across lending, cash management, personal banking, wealth management, and trust services. So the full range of financial solutions. Our goal is to be the best full-service bank for business owners, and really are focused on transition and transformation to make sure that we're there. And we provide targeted digital capabilities. We focus on their client's operating model, and our goal is to be, delivering the right financial solutions with great expertise at the client end. So that's our response time is our focus, and our sort of the quality of our deliverables is what we're really looking to achieve. And our objective is to make a difference to our clients, provide really an agile response for them, build strong relationships, and have a really good in-depth understanding of their business so we can provide the right solutions. And we've got a great team that is really delivering tailored financial advice and with all the tools and solutions they need to allow our clients to really benefit from our services. So that's what the bank is doing, focused on inclusive growth. Given the labor shortage in the many sectors across the industry, businesses do need to build a diverse workforce. We've got to focus on equity, think about inclusive work environments, and really create an environment that delivers an advantage from that approach. And really the goal there is to have the deepest and best talent pool possible for your business to succeed. So diverse teams, they do bring diverse perspectives. There's lots of writing about the strong correlation between diversity and enhanced performance and innovation in companies. And realizing on that is a competitive advantage when you focus on that diverse team structure. Research also shows that a workplace culture that stresses diversity is important. So for example, the fact that women are less likely than men to apply for positions they're just as qualified for, and you want those applications from women, so you want to realize on that opportunity also to generate a competitive advantage for your business. New to Canada employees can also bring very deep experience into the job market and deliver high discretionary effort as they establish themselves with, very strong work ethic, and really can give you an edge over your competitors. And realizing on that group too can be a competitive advantage. So all in all, embedding an understanding of the value of inclusive growth is a win and can only really be positive for your internal work environment, your client acquisition strategy, and for financial progress. So that's what we're zeroed in on.
That's fantastic and a great way to start us off. Arlene, I'm going to pass the virtual floor over to you now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Chris, for starting with a great grounding on why inclusion is a business benefit, because I think that's sort of core to all of this. My name is Arlene Strom, and as you heard, I'm the Chief Legal Officer. But one of the other things that I have the absolute joy of leading at Suncor is the Inclusion and Diversity Council. And it's part of the work at Suncor that is super meaningful, and there's such a pull from employees in our organization to advance our progress in this work. So I'm really privileged to be a part of it. I've been at Suncor for 18 years. What a ride it's been. Suncor is an energy company. We have a large footprint in the oil sands. We're one of the largest producers there. We also have refineries in Montreal, Sarnia, Edmonton, and Commerce City in Colorado. We're in the renewable fuels business. We're in the power business. And I guess where I wanted to start in this question is with our purpose, because I think, this is really where employees want to be part of something that is meaningful. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about our purpose, and it's to provide trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and the earth. And so I go to the while caring for each other, and that then leads to the absolute imperative to have an inclusive work environment. And we think it is a competitive advantage to be on this journey and to create an inclusive work environment. It's also part of our values. It's part of our leadership imperative. And so when I talk to employees, when I hear from them, and we've spent a lot of time on this journey, this last year has even been a further catalyst for deeper conversations around inclusion. And employees want us to work on having a more inclusive work environment. We've come a long way, but we've got a long ways to go. This isn't a one and done kind of thing. And so we like to acknowledge where we've come from, but we also like to acknowledge that we have deep ambition in achieving an inclusive work environment. We actually survey employees there's a number of questions, 10 questions, and we call it our inclusion index, and we're working to be more inclusive. So that's part of our journey. It's a super important part of where we're going at Suncor, and I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation. Thanks, Leah.
And thank you. Again, that was a fantastic, it's how to build on the grounding that Chris started. And Man, I'm going to switch it over to you and ask you to take the floor on behalf of Air Canada. Thanks.
Thank you, Leah.
Go ahead. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was going through. So hello, everyone. My name is Bassy, and I'm the Director for HR Transformation. And in this role, I also have the pleasure to lead the diversity and inclusion work for Air Canada. So as Air Canada is Canada's largest domestic and international airline, serving nearly 220 airports in about 6 continents. And beside being Canada's flag carrier, it's almost the 20 largest airline in the world. And before the pandemic, we had the pleasure of actually serving 50 million customers per year across the world. It's the nature of our global business that directly links us to our commitment to diversity and inclusion. The more diverse our workforce, the better we understand the needs of our global customers and the more exceptional their customer experience is. In this way, diversity and inclusion has been the foundation of our competitive advantage from the get-go. And you may wonder that there are other airlines out there offering the same service. So where is the true competitive advantage? Well, it is in how we shaped our culture over the past several decades in being a pioneer in equal rights for diverse employees and creating a culture that values diversity and seeks diversity in building leadership pipeline. These things have taken a long time to build, and they aren't easy for others to replicate, which further adds to our competitive advantage. I've been with Air Canada for over 16 years, and I've spent bulk of my career in operational excellence. And at Air Canada, I'm very proud that diversity and inclusion is not just an HR priority, it is a business imperative, which is why and what has helped distinguish ourselves from others in the line of business. And I'm really looking forward to further discussing and sharing our ideas and best practices with everybody. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. And we will get into some of those nuts and bolts, but I'd like to, in the meantime, Shawna, welcome you. It's so wonderful to have you today. And I'll give you the floor now to introduce yourself and say some opening remarks. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. And thank you for inviting me to join this panel discussion today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shawna Archibald, and I'm part of the Canadian executive team at JPMorgan Chase. JPMorgan Chase is a leading global financial services firm with assets of $3.4 trillion and operations worldwide. Our firm is a leader in investment banking, financial services, commercial banking, financial transaction processing, and asset management. In my primary role at the firm, I have oversight of our client delivery team, and I also play a key leadership role in supporting our Canadian chapters of our Black Organization of Leadership Development and our Women on the Move employee resource groups. And of course, given today's forum, it's also important that I mention that I'm a member of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's BIPOC Inclusion and Leadership Council. So the question is, how does inclusive growth provide a competitive advantage? And I believe that inclusive growth allows our business to be better, to do better, to be smarter, and be more perceptive. Inclusive growth introduces additional skills, ideas, and perspectives into the workplace and our economy. And as my dear panelists have already mentioned, when people work in inclusive environments, they have a tendency to perform better. And when employees feel comfortable and included in their workplace, organizations get the best results. So the way I see it is that most organizations have a wide range of stakeholders, including clients, internal and external partners, suppliers, and sometimes shareholders, and all of whom are themselves diverse. So when organizations reflect the diversity of the ecosystem within which they operate and the communities that they serve, they can maximize the relationship with every stakeholder. I would also add, as my peers did earlier, that leading consultancy firms and subject matter experts in this space have published many studies and supporting data that affirms that inclusive growth translates to an uplift in the bottom line. So this is my opinion on what drives competitive advantage with inclusive growth.
Thank you, Shawna, and thanks to all of you for setting the table, as it were, and talking about those big pictures, the vision, the importance. It all actually seems to be, common sense. And as a lot of you have alluded to, the data shows the better performance, the happier the employees, so on and so forth. It almost is taken as a given. But as I alluded to, and Shawna, I'm going to start with you this time on this question, is getting more into those little nuts and bolts and sort of concretizing this, folks. I'm going to ask you what initiatives your business, your clients have undertaken to diversify the workforce. And really importantly for a lot of us, where did you start? Where do you recommend for those at the beginning of this journey? There's multiple phases we're all going through, but at that start, where do you suggest that people start on this journey? Shawna, I'm going to start with you for this question. Thank you.
Sure, of course. That's a really great question. I'm going to start with what we've done at JP Morgan, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I would recommend for any businesses starting in this journey. So from a JP Morgan perspective, we clearly recognize that our people are our strength, and the diverse talents that they bring are directly linked to our success. So in terms of initiatives, we take a top-down approach. Our leadership teams have measurable performance targets tied to diversity and inclusion. And we invest really heavily in unconscious bias, diversity and inclusion, and allyship training. And we are laser focused on inclusive recruiting and building diverse recruiting pipelines globally across all levels of our firm. We regularly review our workforce composition, and we publish our commitments to equitable hiring on our career portal and on every job position. We also have large teams that are really focused on exploring new programs to discover recruits from more diverse communities. And we're continuously working across every part of our organization on getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. I will also add, given our assets, we are very fortunate to have a strong global diversity and inclusion team headed by Brian Lamb. And this group focuses on inclusive growth across our entire firm and within all the communities in which we do business. So one of the things that this team oversees are centers of excellence and offices focused on underrepresented groups. Some of these groups include Advancing Black Pathways and Women on the Move, our Office of Military and Veterans Affairs, our Office of LGBT+ Affairs, and also our Office of Disability Inclusion, just to name a few. I would say we also work really closely with Canada's top innovation leaders and business leaders to share best practices and learn from one another in Canadian forums and think tanks, such as the Chamber's BIPOC Inclusion and Leadership Council and CELAR, the Coalition of Innovative Leaders Against Racism. Most importantly, once we recruit the diverse talent, it's critical that we retain the diverse talent. And we have tons of retention strategies. We review this with a regular cadence to ensure that we're developing our diverse talent, we're supporting career progression, and we're nurturing a sense of belonging. We also have a very strong Reaching Business Resource Group network, of which I mentioned. I had up a couple of those. So I'm proud to say that I'm part of a corporate family that really has made big strides towards this journey and recognizes there's always more work to do in achieving inclusive growth. From a recommendation perspective, I would say for organizations that are just starting this journey, I think it's important to start by building a company culture that respects and listens to everyone. Look for and break down barriers holding back underrepresented talent. And there are so many great consulting firms that have published documents and guides on how to approach building inclusive teams. And across these guides and publications, the common theme is really a call to action to implement bold leadership, comprehensive action plans, and promote an empowering environment. So I would say, quite simply, start by identifying measurable targets that are meaningful and achievable for your organization. And most importantly, keep in mind that companies are not always going to get it right. The key is to keep trying and working towards continuous improvement.
Thanks so much, Shawna. And that's a great point at the end as well, right? Don't be, the journey isn't upward and onward and smooth and all of those pieces. So very much appreciated. Roman, what would you like to add to that if I could ask you next? Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, and thanks, Shawna. I think she started it really well and a good base for me to build on. So as she said, we also are, of course, recruitment, training, onboarding is one of our key approaches as well. But in addition to those, I will talk about is our Emerging Leaders program. This has been mindfully and purposefully designed to identify top diverse talent from across the organization and to connect them to other top talent and provide exposure to the executive leaders. The program started actually in 2015, and it has helped us diversify our leadership team, such as 43% of our managers are now female, and over 18% of them self-identify themselves as a BIPOC group. This Emerging Leaders program also includes the multi-generational mentorship, which is to ensure that the tacit knowledge that gets passed from longstanding leaders before they retire, which is a very key to the success of our organization. The other initiative that it's one of my personal favorites as well is the employee resource groups, which are voluntary. They're employee-led groups that aim to foster a very diverse, inclusive workplace, and it's aligned with the organization. We actively been working on design consideration for our ERGs to ensure that we support those employees. We create a very safe and inclusive environment for those employees, and we create structures to ensure that there is a two-way communication with these groups to ensure meaningful actions that are followed by discussions and then the work done by the ERGs. These are some, and then of course the training piece. We also, something that is one of my favorite initiatives at Air Canada was its legacy commitment to equal treatment for all employees, and how this was pursued through equitable benefit plan. So we were pioneers in offering equal employment benefits to partners of same-sex couples, which included health, life insurance, and pensions. And I must mention that this was way before the Supreme Court of Canada mandated married couple benefits to employees with the same-sex partners in 1999. So these are just some of the add-ons to what Shawna started. And as per where to start, I would say start where you are. And I mean it with the utmost sincerity. And I meet so many people that equate DEI efforts to HR specific initiatives, or they equate it to the overwhelm of creating this strong impact and difference, right? And as there's a very important saying that I follow, we can't let perfection stand in the way of progress. Keeping that in mind, I appreciate those feelings, but don't want to discourage any actions, which is why I encourage everybody to start where they are. If your organization has not done anything significant yet, maybe start by inviting feedback from your organization through focus groups, surveys, facilitate a visioning session with the leadership group to understand their vision for DEI. And if you think that they may benefit from more learning, then present a business case to them to why and how diversity, equity, and inclusion work could be offered in your organization, that competitive advantage that you need. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter where you are on your DEI journey. What matters most is that we continue to move ahead and bring everyone along this critical learning journey with us. And that's only going to create the best world for all of us. Thanks, Leah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself off of mute there. And thank you. I love that start where you are, but I also like to focus on youth, but also the intergenerational piece. And Arlene, I'm going to ask you just for some examples on what you've been doing over at Suncor to provide us some further insights on what we can really do to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, happy to do that. And it's really interesting to me as I listen to my colleagues, because there's so many similarities, which gives me some reassurance that we're actually on the right path. And so thank you for sharing that. And I always learn from listening to others too, what they're doing. Our strategy has been focused on 5 pillars. And I almost hesitate to tell you 5 because in some ways I think that they're not all equal. The first one is that we focus on leadership, leader-led inclusion. And we hear from employees that one of the most significant factors in how they experience the workplace is the leader that they work with. So leaders have a big impact on creating an inclusive and respectful workplace. So we start with leadership, we start with training, we start with accountability. That's why we have a leadership imperative that says creating an inclusive and respectful workplace is an imperative. And then I think when we talk about our strategy, we go leadership, leadership, leadership. But some of the other components of that are awareness, and you've heard from that, the awareness and training that goes with this, around bias, Indigenous awareness training, all those kinds of things, super important. Listening, I've heard that from my colleagues. Listening is just so important. We've had a lot of listening labs within our organization. And I'm conscious of the fact that, we don't expect employees who are members of a certain group to do all the educating for us. But we do want to listen to them and understand their experience and learn together. Processes like Roman, we have also looked at processes where we feel there are some built-in bias, systemic bias. We also adjusted our parental leave policy, for example, so that it applies to same-sex adoptive parents. We increased the period. We changed our behaviors in how we treat parents who leave the workplace. For example, in a very sort of parental kind of way, we used to have them hand in their phone and their computer when they went on parental leave. And they felt completely disconnected and didn't know where they were coming back and couldn't see what was going on in the organization. Said, no, we actually need to stay in touch with these people while they're on parental leave. And they can guide the connection, but we shouldn't be doing things like taking away their communication devices and taking them off our email list and so on. So we continue to look at that. There's more work to do around processes and systemic bias. The employee piece, I won't dwell on that, but we also have a number of employee networks, which have just been huge in providing a safe place to share experiences, to provide support, to help educate the whole workforce. And there's a big pull. Like we have thousands of employees that are part of these employee networks now. We also learn from partnerships that we have. You know, we're a member of Pride Canada. We look to other organizations like Catalyst and other things to learn about best practice. And maybe I'll just give one other example that falls into one of these buckets that goes back to where I started, leadership. On September 30th, National Truth and Reconciliation Day, we thought hard and long and hard about what are we going to do on this day to invite people in who may not already be on a reconciliation journey to be part of it. And so one of our Indigenous employees from the Edmonton refinery hosted a sharing circle. Every member of the CEO and all of his direct reports, Mark Little's direct reports, participated in the sharing circle. There were 3 Indigenous employees, or four employees that also participated in it that weren't part of the executive team, and over 6,000 employees tuned in to listen to that sharing circle. And we all shared our journey of reconciliation when we learned about residential schools. And you know, I think, I don't know about you guys, but the older I get, the closer that tears get to my, you know, eyeballs. And there were definitely tears shed in that sharing circle. It was really powerful and a culture defining moment that says, no, leadership is important in this, and we're prepared to be vulnerable and part of this conversation. So I agree with what my colleagues have said. Start where you are. There are lots of great resources, and starting small is okay. But we all have a great resource in our employees, because if we ask and we listen, they will help us to understand where we should start. There's so much that we learn from listening to our employees, to colleagues, to those that we work with, and to those outside the workplace as well. So maybe I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you for sharing that story about September 30th. It is wonderful. And I actually also appreciate your example of parental leave, you know, because we make the assumption we don't want to bother new parents. We want them to be at home enjoying time, but they do, for those who do want to be connected, to keep that option. So I really do like, you know, that concrete example of little things you can do to make a difference. And Chris, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to give your thoughts and thoughts from CWB about some of the initiatives and some of the recommendations you would have as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leah, and thanks for all the comments so far. It's interesting how the degree of alignment I think that's out there, which is fantastic. So we started a number of years ago with a pretty intentional approach as we thought about corporate culture. So we set out to define cultural values that we considered, you know, really made a difference for us. So like Suncor, we have 5 key categories. And the ones we defined for us were people first, relationships gets results, embrace the new, The how matters, and inclusion has power. And that really has instructed us as we thought about our process and how we look to roll out across the organization. We had workshops to talk about all these different categories of how we really support internal culture. And the important outcome is really to engage our people and really win their hearts and minds. And to get ongoing traction, I think there's 3 good examples. And like Air Canada, we established employee represented groups to connect employees with like interests and mindsets. ERGs can absolutely represent any kind of unique collection or topic areas within your organization. And within CWB, we have 8 ERGs. They're very engaging, and they have people that get involved very quickly. So they've been just fantastic. They also provide education that enables people to share their personal experience with their peers and for others to learn from them. We also set out to explicitly address biases. We brought in online tools and learning and development activities to explore and address the biases we all have. And addressing biases is the responsibility of leaders. As Arlene was saying as well, they have to show leadership through performance objectives. And for example, we want to look at completion of mandatory learning modules to support hiring practices as well. And of course, hiring practices, they matter in this equation too. We want to use very inclusive language in job postings. We want to be aware and target the places where diverse candidates look for jobs. We want to mandate a balanced slate when we're recruiting, and we want to remove any biases that a candidate's name or address might provide at the early stage of searches. And finally, as you're looking at setting up a plan like this, typically it would be multi-year, and you want to measure and manage it. So you want to look at a commitment to pay transparency and equity, and you want to really consider creating representation targets that ensure your hiring process eliminates bias and your systems can then hit the targets that you set. So lots of ways to think about it.
And they're all fantastic, right? Pay equity and transparency is, of course, music to many ears. But I also even like what you had said, Chris, about the language and job descriptions, right? Something as simple as reviewing that with those sorts of lens is so important. And I'm going to ask a third question here before we do take questions from the floor. I'm going to encourage people to use the question button as described. I'm getting some questions directly as well, but you can anonymize your questions too as well on that piece as well. So don't fear that or have questions that way. And Rahman, I'm going to ask you to start off with this next question as we do around here and ask each of the panelists here to speak to any and all activities your business has or is taking to diversify partnerships, for example, supply chains or other business practices and best practices of, sort of with that external stakeholder community or helping other and small businesses as well. Rahman, if you could start off, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. So Air Canada very proactively partners with diverse agencies, organizations, and suppliers. And that is to ensure that we positively contribute to the commitment to our communities that we serve. And at the same time, to ensure that we secure appropriate support for our diverse workforces as well. So I'll divide it into 2. One is the diversifying partnership, and then I'll go into the supply chain procurement kind of side. So for diversifying partnerships, our partnerships teams works very diligently in identifying and establishing our community partners to ensure a very clear and strong alignment with our corporate sustainability responsibility strategy. And they use very strict evaluation criteria that includes a very clear and strong focus on supporting our diversity and inclusion priorities within the company. Some of the key priorities includes women in aviation, LGBTQ2+ groups, Indigenous communities, people with different abilities, and initiatives related to Black people of color and multiculturalism. So the recruitment team frequently partners with various specialty recruitment agencies for a very effective outreach and inclusion of a diverse slate of candidates for each job at Air Canada. And the talent development team partners with with the various specialty organizations to build our internal capabilities, which are related to different priorities we have for diversity and inclusion. And furthermore, there is also internship opportunities and scholarships that are offered for to young people from different diverse backgrounds to encourage their participation in aviation and to explore different career options. In terms of supply chain, Air Canada buys over 12 billion worth of goods and services annually, and we have a very strict supplier code of conduct, which is frequently reviewed and revised to ensure that we are holding ourselves and our suppliers accountable to the highest ethical standard. Air Canada has developed a very unique task force that is actually seriously looking at the best way to implement a supplier diversity program and a developing roadmap to meet these goals. And this work is a part of a broader initiative to advance the ESG, which is our environmental, social, and governance procurement. And the task force is working on a very multi-faceted approach, including ways to identify, recognize, and to promote certified diversity suppliers. I can give some examples. I don't know, Leah, if you want to go and maybe we can go get into examples afterwards, or do you want me to chime into that right now?
No, go ahead, Ramon. I think it'd be really timely while it's top of mind here. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So some of the examples which I can say is we have everything: organizational supporting people with different abilities. We have Indigenous groups. So Air Canada has been a valued supporter for Inspire for 29 years as a founder, partner, and official airline to Inspired Awards. Through Inspire, AC has also offered more than 25 bursaries over the last 5 years to young Indigenous people studying to become pilots or even aerospace engineers. We also have members, we are also the members of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses. We support Indigenous art programs, and we also support Vancouver Art Foundation with Vancouver International Airport, media art festivals that we have supported for many years and also help us enrich our in-flight entertainment. We also partner with Indigenous Clean Energy, which is also a pan-Canadian non-profit organization platform that advances Indigenous inclusion in Canada's energy future economy. And that's it. Thank you.
That's a lot. I'm glad we had you elaborate because that is impressive and it gives ideas, right?
Yeah.
Chris, can I hand the floor over to you and ask for insights from CWB on this? Thanks. Chris, you're muted.
It had to happen. I apologize. To make sure we meet goals, it's always best to measure. And we certainly follow the view that what's measured matters and what's measured does get managed. So looking at the banking industry as our lens, we created a plan to address pay transparency and equity. So we're currently working our way through the plan right now and have really undertaken a full systems review to ensure our practices are free of discrimination, targeted development and succession planning for designated groups, enhance communication and transparency of our representation numbers to determine where we have gaps and add to our plan to address those gaps, committed to pay equity and transparency with intentions to establish an oversight committee. That's what we have underway. We're also focusing on learning by engaging our CWB leaders and employees in our diversity and inclusion process by helping leaders understand the role of eliminating bias to improve hiring, promoting, succession planning, and employee experience. And for example, our Indigenous Awareness Certification has the highest uptake among our employees when compared to all other voluntary learning activities. We're also focused on talent, identifying new pools for where to find the best talent. And we're considering and adding new and expanded programs to make material movement on our representation targets. For example, this past summer, we launched an Indigenous co-op internship program for students. And the goal is to develop and retain talent with ongoing and continuous placements. So we placed 14 Indigenous students in different functions across the country, and we provided coaching, mentoring, and work experience. So what this means is that each intern and participant was paired with a mentor, either Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to help grow their knowledge of the bank, to hone their skills. And the participants were placed in different roles, which included part of the corporate team, so in legal services, in banking center teams, for instance, in commercial lending. And the roles both matched and challenged their skill set, and they were given the support needed to make a meaningful contribution to CWB's business. So we're very, very successful with that. And one of the interns said this was an excellent opportunity to learn new skills and navigate my early career with dedicated support. And from management, the mentorship and peer support provided was fantastic, and the program offered a lot to that individual. So we're really focused on how we can continue to support and diversify and really zero in on those areas that we can make a difference.
It's fantastic. I like it. I love the story and the quote as well, Chris. It really brings that to life, right? So thank you very much. Arlene, I'm going to ask you, you've touched on a little bit from Suncor's point of view, but if you could go into more detail about some of these partnerships and some of the work you've been doing, that would be very much appreciated. Thanks.
Sure. As I started out last time, I love listening to my colleagues, and because there's several of the things that they're doing that I feel like, oh, good, yeah, we're trying to do some of those similar things, which is great. So maybe I'll focus on a couple of things in our supply chain. When we set out, we started a journey of our second generation of sort of long-term sustainability goals about, and I'm sorry, the years kind of go so quickly, especially with the pandemic, but about 5 years ago. And so we put in place a social goal. And so Chris, like you know, what gets measured, now I forget the saying, what gets measured matters. And I've got it wrong, but in any event, so as part of our social goal, one of the pieces of the targets that we wanted to measure was increasing our business with that we did with Indigenous businesses. And so we set a goal to increase that, and the goal was, I forget the starting point, but was to get to about 700 million in business that we did with Indigenous businesses. We met that, and it was over a 4-year period. We met that early in the goal period. And so we did it by really focusing our supply chain folks, creating a team and resources that could focus on this, and then working with Indigenous communities, and it was extremely successful. But as part of it, we started with change the way we think and act. And we realized, okay, we're working on that. We're working on changing the way that we think and act, but it's a journey of reconciliation. So we're changing our goal a little bit. It's now framed in this journey of reconciliation. An important part of that has been on partnerships. So not just business and contracts with Indigenous businesses, but partnerships. So a few years ago, we entered into a partnership with 2 Indigenous communities on our East Tank farm. It was $1 billion partnership. They own about $500 million worth of that partnership, and receive net income over a 25-year period that they can use to enhance the well-being in their communities. And just recently, we announced the Asatisi partnership with 8 communities, including Métis communities. And it's a multi-year project to get to this announcement. But these are true commercial relationships. We believe that Indigenous communities should benefit from resource development. And so that's part of changing the way we think and act. This is not a gift. We have commercial relationships with these partners that benefit these communities. We also have a partnership in one of our wind farms with the Aamjiwnaang First Nation. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about, our foundation has a relationship with an Indigenous Youth Advisory Council with representatives from across the country, from communities where we operate. And these youth come together. I have the great privilege of being the co-pipe carrier with a woman from the Aamjiwnaang First Nation. And we agreed in ceremony to be accountable to our organizations, that when we are in dispute, that we would carry the positive of the relationship with our peers, that we would hold that relationship as special and respectful and in respect, and as a long-term meaningful relationship. And so we're learning from these youth, and looking for ways to listen to them and give them more input on decision making and the partnerships that we have with the foundation, through our foundation. So those are just a couple of the ways that I just wanted to add to some of the other things that we've heard from Chris and Rahman.
Thanks so much. And it's times like these when I wish we had those word clouds, right? With, you know, youth and culture and values. I love that, true commercial relationships, resource groups, networks, so on and so forth. So we're going to take a couple of questions from the floor here, folks. I'm combining them as they're coming in through different pieces here. We've got Shawna back on the line. Shawna, we're opening it up to questions here, Shawna, and then I'm going to come back to you on the third question just to let you get readjusted and jump back in here. But Shawna, this will come to you as well, because Arlene and Chris have both spoken to this. Roman, I bet you it's at Air Canada too, but one of the first questions we've just had these comments about targets, measuring, have to name it to be able to measure. And I'm wondering, here it says, yeah, how do you measure success? Do you have targets? But I'm wondering if you're in your response, if at all, folks, you could give a little bit of comment to capacity. And I mean that in the sense of, you know, even if you're, you know, you've all got large companies, resources, if you're smaller on that size, but also where you are in your journey, right? It can be a little bit daunting from day one to do that. So any sort of ideas or comments you have on that. And Shawna, maybe I'll start with you there. If you want to catch your breath still, let me know. But because you had mentioned it first, and I believe even your opening remarks, if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Sure thing. Thank you for connecting me back in. From a performance target perspective, this is an ever-changing, I think, exercise, even within our organization. So we try and identify measurable targets. And with that, one of the things that we do is, from a interview panel perspective, we want to ensure that we have diverse panels. So we have a requirement that when we have panel interviews, that we have diverse representation on those panels. That is something that's measurable, and that it's not gray, in my opinion. It's either you did or you didn't. From a target perspective, we also want to ensure that we see marginalized folks, underrepresented folks within all levels of the organization. So another metric that's leveraged is defining what percentage is achievable to drive in terms of achieving the targets across our lower entry roles, as well as all the way up to our leadership teams. And so that's one of the approaches that we've taken. And we're always looking to learning from others and sharing additional experiences. And I would also add that I work for a small division, and there might be other practices that are available within our organization that I also may not be close to.
Shawna, that's great. And it makes it a lot less daunting. And it actually does bring the point, right? You're in a small department within a bigger piece, so you still have that small piece. And without, you know, I'm going to open the floor to the other panelists here to sort of see if you've got anything to add. Rahman, I see you unmuted, so I'll ask you first.
Thank you. I'll have to agree. So I'm going to build on what Shawna just said about having diverse panels. Very important. But the bigger question for organizations is, how do you get to a diverse panel, right? And it ties into our recruitment. So for example, at Air Canada, we have a very multifaceted approach to diversifying our workforce, right? The brand of the company and the global nature of our business, it definitely helps us, right, in attracting the top talent, but where we also deliberately reach out to all Canadians, especially groups that may not necessarily pursue careers in aviation. So from recruitment, the teams may make sure that we post our jobs on wide community specific job forms. And this is to ensure that we have a strong pool of candidates, which result in a diverse slate of candidates that get considered for the job, right? And we have to, and there's a fine line, and it's not tokenism either, right? So we have to keep in mind that we as a company has to do the best in our ability to reach out to every community out there to attract the top talent and then hire the right individual for the job, which is going to give us that diverse panel, which is then going to go and give us, diverse opportunities, right? So that's where the tie-in is. And that's something that we're very proud at Air Canada to do, right? So, and of course, there are targets. We have our report, a CSR report that we create. There's multiple reporting metrics, but at the same time, we don't believe in tokenism either, right? So there's no quotas that we're like, okay, X amount is going to be there. It is the best person. It's the best person who is going to get the job, but it is our job as a company to go and make sure that the underrepresentatives are actually reached out to give an opportunity to apply and to compete. And then we have the right panel to select as to who's going to get that job.
Thank you. I really appreciate that insight too, because that's the fine edge of the target proverbial sword. Arlene, I've seen you've unmuted here as well. Please do jump in.
I was just going to add to, one of the things that I think is important in our philosophy is the notion that, we actually used to call it diversity and inclusion, and we very deliberately change it to inclusion and diversity because we feel that if the focus is on inclusion, diversity will follow. Now, that is not code for targets and metrics don't matter because those are the outcomes. So, but that's why our focus is on measuring if our employees tell us that it's a respectful and inclusive work environment. And so that's where we're really focused on. We're giving feedback to leaders around what they're doing from their teams and how they can change the way they lead to create that more inclusive work environment. That being said, we think that has to go with full transparency. So we do also need, we're not in the place where we want to be in terms of employees self-declaring if they fall within a particular group. So we have more work to do. That tells me we have more work to do for employees to feel safe to declare that they are a member of a certain group. So it's just, I just wanted to add to that sort of the philosophical bent to how we're approaching it. And you can see that we see by the data that we have more work to do.
Yeah, it's very thoughtful, and I like because then one follows the other. Absolutely, Arlene. Chris, did you want to add to this conversation at all around targets and mandated numbers and the likes? We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a great alignment in terms of everybody's comments, and I think you are often challenged with the size of different groups, but I absolutely agree that you have to come at it with a balanced slate. You have to come at it looking for the people that can provide that slate to make sure that you are well represented. I agree with Arlene, people that don't self-declare. That's a challenge too, as you look at looking at the numbers. I think we really are, very focused on having all the right opportunities for people to be involved in that inclusive delivery. And that's what we want to really support. And if we need to be intentional all the time about ensuring that we have that structure in place.
Intentional, absolutely. Shawna, we've just finished the round of questions on that, but I did want to come back to you and have that opportunity to answer that third question we had poised to the panelists about activities to diversify partnerships, supply chains, business practices, and best practices that you and JP Chase Morgan know about. If you wanted to add something to that, we'd really welcome that right now. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. From a supplier, we have a strong global supplier diversity team, and we have invested billions of dollars on the global space with respect to building up diverse suppliers. What's critical to our positioning in investing so many dollars in that space is that we have a strong belief that when we leverage the businesses in the communities in which we work, that also creates job and drives additional economic opportunity for those areas, because these businesses have a tendency to hire from their, immediate and surrounding communities. And so we have a very deep reaching supplier network. And we do have mechanisms by which diversity is tracked so that we can definitely call out those suppliers when those opportunities surface. I should also add that, as part of the BIPOC membership council, there's also a major focus and exercise that will be underway where we're going to do a deep dive in terms of opportunities to leverage partnerships. And I know that part of those discussions are going to be focused on, what type of do we champion, do we continue to push towards diverse or supplier certification? And does that create any barriers of entry? And additionally, what we also need to look at is what are the resource demands from businesses, large and small, to support this mechanism, and also what is the technology to try and drive that, and then also make sure that we have measurable data to measure the success of programs such as that. So those are my thoughts in supplier diversity.
Thank you. And I love that community focus as well, Shawna. I really like how that has those knockoff benefits as well. And of course, now I see the questions are pouring in, and we could, have another 3 hours of this and not finish up. What I am going to do is just ask folks here, we're going to do one more round before we close out on any further thoughts and closing remarks, but I'm actually going to ask you a question that you can choose to answer or not, because I know it kind of puts you on the spot in wrapping these up, but I thought it was fantastic. The question that did come is, what is the biggest reward for you personally in going forward on this journey of diversification and inclusion, or inclusion and diversification, as the case may be? I thought that was a nice question. So with any closing thoughts, if you wanted to add that as well. And again, Shawna, maybe I'm going to start with you just to be sure here. Well, we have you. Thanks.
Well, I struggle with technology today. I would say from a personal perspective, not only am I a corporate business person, I'm also a mom, and I'm a mother of a 7-year-old. And I think as a Black female mother of a young Black boy, it is personally important to me that we continue to drive this forward so that my son can see success and not have to experience some of the things that I've experienced.
Shawna, thank you so much. And Arlene, those tears you talked about, let me tell you. Arlene, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thanks.
Well, thanks for that question. Similar to Shawna, I'm a grandma, and my youngest grandchild, my granddaughter, is 11. So when I think, in 2050, she'll be 40. And, we talk about this being a change that's needed over time. And part of what's really meaningful to me is being able to be part of work to speed the rate of change, because I don't want her to have to wait for change. So there, see, here comes the tears. I told you, they're really, the older I get, the more I'm grandma-like, the easier it is to have the tears. So that's why it's important to me. And I'm really proud to work for an organization where my fellow leaders are committed to speeding the rate of change. And employees are asking for it and stepping in. One of the challenges that we have is making this part of their work, not just something that we ask them to do off the side of their desk. And so we're hearing from employees, how can you build this into performance and get it recognized by my leader? And I'm working hard on employee networks and other initiatives to lead these things through our organization. And so I would say that's one of the things that's important for us as we continue this work and speed the rate of change. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this.
Arlene and Shawna, thank you. Thank you for those personal shares. I really do appreciate it. Roman, I'm going to send it over to you, and then Chris, thanks.
This is a very emotional one, but I'm going to hold my tears. I don't think I cried that fast, but maybe that's going to change eventually. But for me, it's carrying the torch. I've seen my mom. She when we migrated with both my parents, and they had to come here, and they had great jobs back home, and studying, getting to where they needed to be, and the struggles from a language perspective, from culture perspective, from the learning and the growth that I have seen both my parents, and keeping some of those cliche culturally remarks away, and raising their 3 children with equal rights. You know, my brother, my sister, and myself, I don't think that we ever felt the difference. But I grew up, and I was friends with people that were still tied to a lot of holding back females, and females not in non-traditional positions. And when I started Air Canada, I started in a non-traditional position as a woman, and being there and honestly being supported, it's my job. I started right after university, and I have been with the company for over 16 years, and you can say that I have been supported. I have broken barriers, and DEI work is not only important to carry the legacy of my parents, but it's also our duty for our kids, and to have that world that does not see color or does not see differences, right? So we all need to be accepted of who we are for our differences, and our differences is what's going to make us strong and unbreakable. And that's why this work is very important, and I'm very, very passionate about it. Not only from, I belong to a BIPOC community. I am a woman in aviation, in untraditional roles, and I will keep on doing my job and breaking barriers. And I have 2 boys, 9 and 6, and I am very determined to raise them in a very proper format to making sure that they grow up to be, understanding what is important and what all this work means. So thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Chris, I'm going to turn over the floor to you, and then we'll have some closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think this is personal. I think everybody has provided great personal comments about how important inclusion and diversity is. And my view is that, if we don't have equity and transparency, that's just not good enough. We need to have a world that allows people to achieve what they can achieve. And that's just the basis under which we work. And, I have 2 adult daughters that have done great in the workplace, and I want that opening for them. I don't want there to be anything that would impinge whatever choices they choose to make. So yes, I'm fully on board, and it is personal, and I think we all have to take it that way.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for that. It's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Shakiba Shayani, who's the President and CEO of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce, to provide closing remarks. We're getting close, folks. So thank you, Shakiba.
Thanks, Leah. I too really want to thank Chris, Arlene, Rahman, and Shawna, for all of your insights and the practical tips on how to build an inclusive recovery. Chris, you were right. You said inclusion is power, and it's discussions like these ones that continue to signal to all businesses and organizations that this is a business imperative that does elevate our collective competitive advantage. The Guelph Chamber, alongside chambers and boards of trade across the country, with the support of the Canadian Chamber's BIPOC Council that I also have the privilege to participate on, we've all identified the significance of promoting and prioritizing the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As the influential network that we are, it is all of our responsibility to incorporate DEI directly into our own business models by sharing and recognizing best practices, and as necessary, advocating for policy change. Again, very grateful to all of you, the panelists, our moderator, Leah,